Hello and welcome to Using Networked Improvement to Improve the IEP Process, presented by Jasmine Vance. My name is Juliet Nyanwu, Program Support Specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this breakout session. Before we start this session, a few logistics. So this session will be recorded and archived on our conference page, agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And the interpretation icon located in the same area will provide you access to Spanish translation if you need it. We will ensure the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and the presenter. Please ensure that your volume is muted to avoid any background distractions during the presentation, and we encourage you to engage with each other in the chat, and when possible, keep your cameras on so we can see all of your beautiful faces. And with that, Jasmine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julia. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Using Networked Improvement to improve the IEP process. I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you all this morning to share a bit about the work of our network and the learnings that have come from it. My name is Jasmine Vance, and I'm an improvement facilitator with the Systems Improvement Leads Grant, aka the SIL project. And I just wanted to share a little bit about my background in education so you know who is in front of you this morning, and also so you can know where my passion for this work comes from. So I've been in education for about 15 years now. I started off working in the career technical education sector. And so my job was going out to local high schools and sharing with students about career pathways after they graduate from high school and getting them to sign up for classes that we offered at a center. It was at that time that I also realized that, maybe teaching is in my blood. And so I decided to get into teaching, and I joined a local program that allowed me the ability to go back to my district where I grew up and start my teaching career in the area of special education. So I was a mild moderate teacher, and I've had the opportunity to work in district schools, charter schools, from elementary to high school. But my favorite, I have to say by far, was working with middle school age students. And I remember someone told me you have to be a special kind of crazy to love middle school, but that is definitely where my heart lies. From there, I had the ability to work in a role as a special education director, as well as a program specialist to support others in getting their programs up and going. And those two roles actually brought me to the work that I do now. And that is working with teams around the state of California to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So I want to tell you a little bit about our project and the focus of our work. So the SIL Grant Project is a collaborative grant project between the Riverside County SELPA, the El Dorado County SELPA, and the El Dorado Office of Education. And this work is made possible with collaboration and support from the California Department of Education and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. The focus of the work is captured here in our theory of action. And I'm going to share it with you because I think it's really important for you all to understand the focus of the work that we bring to the field. We believe that if partners with county offices of education, SELPAs, LEAs, the System of Support Lead Agencies, CDE, and CCEE, they will be able to build the capacity in the areas of data best practices, continuous improvement culture methodologies and mindsets, and access to resources to support and implement high impact change ideas. In doing so, we believe that students then with disabilities will have access to a cohesive and equitable school system that's intentionally designed to provide high quality instruction and support, which ultimately would result in educational and post-secondary success. So that undergirds all of the work that we do, and we really work to infuse that into all of the offerings that we provide to the field. With that said, we would love to stay connected with you. If you're a social media person, I'm lightly becoming social media for work. We would love to stay connected, and you can see all of our social media handles here on the screen. If there is something that resonates with you from today's session that you post, please go ahead and post it and tag us as well, as we would love to engage with you in the future. So our agenda for today is as follows. We're going to wrap up our welcome here momentarily and then move into a conversation around what is networked improvement. And we'll work to discuss the Innovating for Student Excellence Network and tell you more about that. From there, we'll talk about the first focus area that we decided to engage in with the NIC which is improving the IEP process. I'll also share a couple of impact stories with you all from this work, and then we'll close out for the day. This will be an interactive situation, so we want to answer any questions, or I want to answer any questions that you have, but also give you all an opportunity to connect with one another. So there'll be a couple of short breakouts so you can kind of process your thinking with one another, and then definitely ask any questions that you have. I will ask that you kind of pause or jot down questions that you have along the way, and I'll give you opportunities to ask those things at a couple of different designated sections in today's presentation so that we can make sure we're answering all the questions at once. So in an effort to model that, I'm going to pause now and see, are there any questions before we get started with today's presentation? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. So then we'll go ahead and move forward. There is something in. Okay, perfect. Thank you for dropping. The PDF access is also in the chat as well. So if you want to see a copy of the slides that I'm presenting, thanks, Juliet. So now that hopefully we feel sufficiently welcomed, let's talk a little bit about what networked improvement really is. Essentially, it's an intentionally designed social organization that with distinctive problem-solving focus, roles, responsibilities, and norms for membership, and the maintenance of narratives that detail what they are and why it is important to be affiliated with them. A NIC, as they're affectionately known as, is marked by four essential characteristics. It is focused on well-specified common aim. So you're wanting to set a goal for everyone so that we know what we're aspiring towards. It's guided by a deep understanding of problems, the system that produces it, and a shared a shared working theory to improve it. And so that's where we take the opportunity to be really clear about the problem that we're trying to solve and our understanding of how we think we'll be able to address it. It's disciplined by the methods of improvement research to develop, test, and refine interventions. And we test those ideas out before we go to wide-scale implementation to know, is this idea going to get us closer to achieving the vision that we set for ourselves? And it's organized to accelerate their diffusion out into the field and effective integration into varied educational contexts. So once we learn that our ideas are working, we want to share the learnings with others so that they can also implement it into their spaces. So the energy of network improvement is harnessed by improvement efforts differing in various fields and at varying levels. And I just want to share a couple of them with you before we dive into the work that we've been doing. Austin Independent School District, they utilize networked improvement to develop a sustainable teacher feedback protocol. And what they found in their efforts is that initially they thought new teachers weren't getting enough feedback so that they'd feel supported and wanted to stick with the field. And so they ran a test and they had folks sign up outside of the new teacher's classroom. And what they quickly realized is not only are new teachers getting feedback, but they're getting feedback from multiple places and oftentimes the feedback was conflicting to one another. So they use this idea of networked improvement in order to create a quick protocol that they can have clear and defined feedback processes to give to new teachers. In the social sector, 1,000 Homes campaign utilized networked improvement on a project that has been focused with reducing homelessness in the state of California. And if you're in California, you know that there's still a lot of work to do in this area. And there are still ongoing efforts that they have utilized learnings from around the state to work to reduce homelessness. The World Health Organization, or WHO, utilized network improvement in the healthcare sector to address the emerging SARS virus in the early 2000s. And so they tapped into learning from around the world in different hospitals and medical entities to learn about how to treat and help mitigate for the SARS virus in the early 2000s. Additionally, at the community college level, networks have been used to help learn about how students are working their way through math programs. What they realized early in this network is that students who are not completing math classes at the community college level oftentimes were not advancing and finishing their associate's degree and potentially moving on to a 4-year degree. And so they used networked learning to help figure out how they could better support students at the community college level to engage with and complete their math courses in time. The key thing to consider is that networked improvement really honors the fact that we can learn more faster if we're doing it together. And these are just a few examples across varying industries that touch on how improvement has and can be utilized to help us learn. So, with that in mind, let's talk more about how SIL has leveraged networks to learn our way into improvement. When we thought about launching the Innovating for Student Excellence Network, we've spent some time thinking about the historical context of our educational system. And so I want to share a little bit about that with you all to help ground us in why we're so passionate about this work and feel that it is important. There's a history of segregation, both in this country and in the field of education. Racial disparities have been evidenced through Jim Crow laws and the Brown versus the Board of Educational ruling in 1954. It was another decade before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, followed still by nearly another decade in which the Rehabilitation Act was passed in 1973, and then IDEA in 1975. Even with those legal advancements, disproportionate outcomes persisted and continue to persist. Additionally, at the time of our launch in California, we found that California was actually lagging behind the rest of the nation in rates of inclusion for students with disabilities as well. And then pandemic school closures forced inequities even further into the spotlight. And so the call to accelerate learning for students with disabilities was very loud for us and came through very clear. And so it moved us to start thinking about how could we reimagine a world in which students with disabilities are supported at the highest level within our educational system. We knew we couldn't go back to normal or status quo. Frame it a bit further, the challenge that we were working to lean into, at our launch, there were about 750,000 students with disabilities in California in the fall of 2021. Each student with disabilities, of course, you all know, has an individualized educational plan that's designed to address their needs. 224,788 students with disabilities don't graduate from high school annually, and only 10.8% are prepared for college and career readiness once they do leave. And students with disabilities, in addition to that, we found were scoring negative 119.4 points below the math standard that comes from our annual assessment. So early in our investigation, as we started to dive into this work, we wanted to know, okay, how many of our students are actually meeting the IEP goals that are put in their IEPs on an annual basis? And we learned that about 62% of IEP goals weren't even marked, right? So we were starting with trying to understand how many goals were being met, but found this new surprising data piece that we hadn't considered, that goals are not even being marked in the IEP. So the urgency in this work felt really clear, and it helped lead us to our why. So those challenges helped lean us into thinking about how we could address these issues. And we know that IEP goals are the heart of educational programs for students with disabilities. And we believe that we can improve our system design so that 100% of IEP goals can be achieved, which would then set students up for a lifetime of access and success. And this being our why, we decided to embrace it. And it helped to guide us to landing our aim statement that we set for ourselves in this work. This is our aim. By June of 2027, we will increase the percentage of IEP goals being met from 38.5% to 100%. Now, you may be thinking 100% is lofty, and that seems like a very big goal, and we agree. It is lofty, and it is a huge goal that we are trying to work to attain based on the work that we're doing in the network. But we also realize that anything less than 100% means that there are students that are going to be left behind. And so we let that serve as motivation for us as we engage in this work and this learning together. So about the network, in the fall of 2021, we launched. And we set forth with 6 teams that joined us in this effort. And we have been privileged to be joined by 3 more teams in this current school year to engage in learning alongside us. Each team, and you can see the dots represented here on the maps, include a combination of administrators, teachers, and special education providers from the districts or LEAs. It gives an opportunity for county offices of education, SELPAs, districts, charters to collaborate across the network and across the state of California. And at this time, we're collectively serving more than 30,000 students with disabilities in the state of California, which feels awesome. Our network structures and how we support teams that are a part of this work are the following. So we have network meetings where we do quarterly learning sessions with action periods in between. And so our quarterly learning sessions are virtual, and they're half a day where we come in, we check on our network metrics and measurements, and we share information with one another about what's working well and barriers that we've been facing. We also do a shorter all NIC huddle at the midpoint of each action period, again, where we're workshopping and talking about successes, and then thinking about what barriers are coming up for us, and tapping into learning from one another to how we may be able to overcome them. We have improvement teams that are supported by coaches, and I actually have the privilege of coaching 2 of the teams that are in our network at this time. And so we meet weekly with our teams to be able to support them and kind of navigate, okay, what are the next steps that we want to engage in? And then they have the opportunity to meet with leaders, school sites, and testers. Sometimes we have folks that will test out our ideas on an as needed basis. And lastly, our overall hub structures are as follows. The coaches will meet every other week just to make sure we're on the same page. And then we also meet with our network coordinator. And it's really nice because she has kind of like our 30,000-foot view of what's going on in the network. I feel like us as coaches have like the 10,000 cruising altitude views. At the cruising altitude, I can't recall. But so we see a little bit at an elevated level. Then, of course, our teams that we're working with, they're on the ground and they're doing the super hard work. We track our information and our learning through data collection and through plan, do, study, act cycles. And so that's just where we are testing our ideas to see how they work out. Are they actually working in the classroom the way we intended? Are they actually being helpful to our case managers and service providers? And we collect data around that. And then we also will conduct literature reviews to help come up with change ideas in areas that are uncharted for us at that time, or if we just need some other ideas to help fuel the work. You can see that there's a pretty intricate structure that we have in place, but all in service of bringing forth these learning opportunities so that we can meet the needs of students in California. So with this work that we do, we model it under the improvement journey, and you can see that here on the screen. So oftentimes we have ideas of what we would like to see in our systems, and that's like the vision that we're setting for ourselves. And oftentimes it's great, and we're like, if we can just get there, it'll be perfect. But there's this gap between that vision that we've set for ourselves and our current reality. And that's where we start to tap into the improvement journey to help us get closer and closer to the vision that we've set forward for ourselves. The improvement journey consists of the following steps: understanding the current system, and that's where we're taking the opportunity to engage in an investigation and really determine why are things happening the way that they're happening. We then move forward to focus collective efforts where we focus on our theory to improve the issue that we've identified in our system. Generate ideas for change is where we come up with ideas to set into action in that journey towards improvement that we want to see. When we learn and practice, it's where we're testing our ideas incrementally before going to wide scale implementation. And then sustaining and spreading is once you see that improvement and you determine what you need to do to maintain it, you start to share those ideas with others so that they can benefit from the learnings that you had along the way. And so, though this image makes it seem like this journey is very linear and you go from one step to the next to the next, well, the journey is actually a little bit more like this. It's messy, where you may start at the beginning and you say, okay, here's the problem that we are going to work to solve. And then you assemble a team so you can work together to solve the issue. Perfect, right? You set your goals. Then once you do that, you actually are like, now we actually have the right team because we forgot to include someone before. Then you're like, aha, now that we've started this work, we actually found the real problem that we need to solve, and it wasn't the initial one that we thought. And then you start to analyze and investigate your system to understand what's happening. You design and you're testing improvements, and you start to implement things into your system until you reach the end of the process, right? Actually, we're just joking. There's still more work to be done. And I have to say that when I first started in this work, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. It feels so messy, and I just want to go from one step to the next to the next. But what I have come to appreciate about this journey is that it gives us the opportunity to be humble in our considerations that our initial ideas are not always right. And sometimes we need to take a step back and really think about what is the true problem that we're working to solve within our systems, and then take incremental steps to do it. And we recognize you can't do that for every single thing, right? Because there's so many issues that come up on a daily basis, but those critical problems that are often reoccurring, we want to take some time to get a better understanding of how those things work. And I see some kudos coming through in the chat. Yep, Carla, so true, for sure. So, with that in mind, I actually want to give you all an opportunity to turn and talk and think about some of the content that we've discussed so far. So, this is going to be a really short breakout, about 3 to 4 minutes, where you can think about what's resonating with you and think about any questions that you have. And when we come back to the main room, I can answer any questions that are coming up for you at this time. All right, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I would love to hear from you and see what's coming up for you at this time and any questions that you may have that are coming up for you. You can drop them in the chat or come off mute. It's up to you. Okay. All right. Well, then if you're good so far, then we'll keep going. We'll move forward. So let's bring our screen share back up. Great. Okay. So you may be wondering now, where do we start? And let's talk a little bit about that. We have a theory that's outlined that shows, based on data, our current understanding, and our best guesses, how we may work to meet those lofty goals that we set for ourselves. And one of the first things that we decided to address was improving the IEP process. So here's a copy of our driver diagram. It is a robust theory that we're engaging in. And one thing that I really want to highlight is, though IEP process is one of our main focus areas that we believe, or drivers that we believe will help us engage in this work, there are other areas that we believe need to also be addressed in order to meet the lofty goal that we've set for ourselves. So we think that inclusion, strong instructional practices, and of course, student attendance are going to be critical areas to moving the needle and getting closer to improvement. But we started with that IEP process. And so this is just kind of a zoomed in lens of that part of our driver. So in our initial learnings, it came from pulling data by hand. Teams were conducting empathy interviews and creating process maps to show what was currently happening in the system. And so when the teams were pulling the data, there were several areas that we focused on, and you can see a copy of the data sheet that the teams used in order to start documenting their findings. So we were looking at IEP reviews, and we wanted to count the number of goals in each of the IEPs. When we looked at the number of goals, we also wanted to see which ones had a response marked as met or not met, and then of those that were marked, which ones were actually met. We also did goal quality analysis and utilized a rubric that we developed to analyze from a quantifiable standpoint the quality of goals that were being written in IEPs. Teams also conducted empathy interviews, as I mentioned, where they went out and talked to their case managers to get an understanding of how are they preparing for IEPs, how are they going about writing strong IEP goals, and started to document those in process maps. And the process maps were a fantastic way to visually set up and have conversations about like what's missing or what steps do we want to make sure that we're incorporating. And if you're thinking like, wow, that sounds like a lot of work to get up and going with this process, you're not wrong. But when we're thinking about improvement efforts, we have to engage in expending our resources in a certain way. And resources such as time or human bandwidth, they're not limitless. And so these districts that have joined us in this effort are really making a decision on how to spend their time and their resources of human bandwidth and effort to engage in this work. And all of it is in service of improving outcomes for students. So we learned and leaned in really hard to our initial investigation. And we decided that we wanted to start by addressing our IEP goal quality, our IEP documentation. So just making sure that that box was checked if the goal was marked as met or not. And then also looking at the frequency of IEP meeting collaboration with families before the IEP meeting. And that was something that came out of the empathy interviews and the process maps in our initial investigation, is that we noticed it was a missing step from a lot of the processes that case managers or providers were engaging in when preparing for the IEP. So once we figured out like what data we wanted to collect, we started to think about how do we want to actually do it. So to address these three areas, these are three tools that have like started to come out of the network and we've seen a lot of success with over the last several years. First, we found, and you can see an image screenshot of one here, that a checklist was a great way to ensure that all areas of the IEP were present and accounted for. And it was a really quick and easy way for us to address that goal documentation issue. So one of the teams developed a prototype and they tested it out. They had some case managers use it, check off each part of the IEP was complete when they were developing the IEP, And we started to see gains with that team in ensuring that we were close to 100% of IEP goals, at least having a response as it being met as marked met or not met, excuse me. And so once we started to get that data, they shared that idea with other teams, and those other teams started to see the same success by using something as easy as a checklist to do it, which was great. We also, as I mentioned, started to dig into how do we bring in parent input, parent guardian input prior to the IEP meeting to make sure that their voices are heard. And so another team developed a protocol that they were able to test out. And they came up with a set of questions and they asked the case manager to call a family prior to the IEP and ask those questions. Because I wanted to, one, make sure, do we have the right questions that we're asking in order to get prepared and bring in that parental guardian voice prior to the IEP meeting is being held. So once the case manager did that, they also got feedback from the family, like, how was it to answer these questions? And is there anything that we didn't ask you that you think we should include in this questionnaire going forward? So this went through many iterations. And the questions changed a bit over time until it got to a place where it seemed like there was enough information being elicited or asked of families so that they could really engage in a meaningful way before even reaching the IEP table. And of course, as you're probably thinking, once we started to see that this data was helpful, we shared it with other teams that were a part of the network so they could try it out in their own context. And lastly, this is probably the cornerstone tool that we've utilized, and I mentioned earlier that we even used in our initial investigation. This is the rubric that we use in order to determine and quantify how IEP goals are and the quality of the goal that has been developed for each IEP. And so this was used in our initial investigation, and now teams are also using this tool on a monthly basis because part of the network data that we collect is having teams pull sample of IEPs each month and score the goals to see, like, okay, how well are we writing our goals with additional support and feedback. We even have a team that has really made this a foundation of a feedback loop process that they've engaged with their case managers and with their service providers. Now, you may be looking at this and saying, great, okay, cool, you made a lot of tools, but has it actually helped? Have you seen increases in the data? And if you're thinking that, I'm going to answer that question in just a moment. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about the learning cycles we used in order to tap into learning about if these tools were going to work or not. So the image that you see here is that of a plan, do, study, act cycle. And it is naturally like we have so many ideas that we think are going to work and help us to address the issues that are coming up in our system. But we also know that if we roll things out full scale to everyone and it fails, we start to lose a lot of will and interest and effort. And so we found that it is really important for us when we come up with an idea that we think is going to help us to remediate an issue that we found, is to test it out in smaller increments before we move to a larger scale implementation. And so that is the crux of our plan, do, study, act cycles that we engage in. I think one of the most key learnings that came out of all of these cycles of learning is that we know that all of the tools that I just shared with you are really helpful in helping case managers and service providers in creating strong IEPs and strong IEP goals. But I think the thing that's most critical that we learned is these things that are in isolation really good work even better when they're embedded in a process that includes a feedback loop so that providers or service providers are getting feedback on the quality of the IEPs and the goals that they're writing. And so now that is something that the teams in the network are working on to embed this in a process that's easy to follow and accessible for folks within their districts. So back to the question of what improvements have we seen thus far? Yes, we have seen improvement, which is really exciting. When we're looking at goal quality, we have seen an increase of goal quality by 13% across the district. And so that's where teams are utilizing that rubric to score their IEP goals and determine how well written those goals are. For the initial 6 teams, when we look at the data for those teams that have been with us a little bit longer, that percentage increases to 20%. So there's definitely been goals and the quality of goals that are being written across the network. We've also seen a 20% increase in the number of goals that are being met across the network as well. We want students to meet high quality, well-written goals, and we're seeing an increase in that as well. Lastly, we've seen a 50% increase in parent collaboration prior to the IEP process. And so it's been really impactful to have parents be brought into these conversations early and often. And we've seen that it's created experiences where when you get to the IEP table, it's less contentious and parents feel a lot more engaged in the IEP process. With that in mind, I'd love to take a moment to share a couple of impact stories that have come out of this work, and just kind of share what's landing for folks. First is from a teacher that's actually a part of the network, and she shared that I know that my experience in the NIC, development of the parent interview, and using the interview with the parents prior to the IEP has made a really big difference. The quality of the IEP and the increased interaction between the parent and their commitment to their child at home is obvious. Knowing the families and spending time with them talking about their child deepens the relationship and builds the trust. And so this was one of the team members that has used the parent collaboration protocol to help establish stronger rapport with families. So that's fantastic. This other impact story is states, and not yet verbal, almost 4-year-old with autism has not been able to tell his family about his experience at school. Through the student participation process and the use of a picture icon system, his teacher was able to elicit information to compile into an About Me book to share at the IEP meeting. It was the first time that his parents had insight into how he feels about school and what he enjoys. And they didn't know that not only could he trace his name, but he also really loved to do it. And this is an impact story that is being sourced from an emerging idea that one of the teams is leaning into, which is making sure that student voice is present at each of the IEP meetings. And for students with more extensive support needs, they may utilize a book or something of that nature to help ensure that the student voice is present. And for other students, it may mean having them to facilitate their IEP meeting. So this is an emerging idea that we are working to kind of test and tap into. I'm looking at the time, and so I want to make sure that we end on time. So I'm actually going to skip the next turn and talk so I can share a little bit more information with you all as we close out for the day, and then answer any questions that folks may have. So I just want to share some next steps that we have within the network. So we're currently in the process of doing the following. We are first scaling any promising change ideas across the network, and I've shared several with you all today that we've seen great success with and I want to continue that work. We are also working to grow the network. So I shared with you all that we had 3 additional teams join us this year, which has been amazing, and we want to have more join us in the future. We are working to maintain those network-wide improvements that we've seen, and that have been achieved thus far, which is absolutely critical. And then lastly, we are working to increase the percentage of IEP goals that are being met. So that's our march to 100% that we have set for ourselves. If any of this information has inspired you, has piqued your interest, we would love to have you or your team join us in this work, even if it's just getting more information, or if you're like, no, I'm ready, I want to sign up. We would love to connect with you and have you consider joining us. I also want to share are on the verge of of launching an attendance network as well. And so teams that would be a part of that network would be engaging in similar learning activities as that I've just shared with you this morning. We know that after the COVID school closures, chronic absenteeism rates have raised probably across the country, but for sure here in California. And so we are launching this network as a means of learning collectively how we can get students engaged and bring them back into the school site. So if you are interested in either just more information or joining either of the networks, I am going to drop links in the chat for you all right now, and you can click on one. The first one is an interest form, and the second one, or excuse me, the first one is a flyer about the networks, and it has the dates for the upcoming year. And then the second one is about the interest form that you can join the network with as well. All right. Towards the bottom of the homepage on systemimprovement.org, there's also a space for you to sign up for emails. And so we will be later in this year publishing what we call change packages. And so these change packages will include all of the resources that I shared with you all today, give some guidance about how you can take them and work to embed them in your own systems, and think about how you may be able to approach some of these same issues if you've seen them in your IEP goal quality, or even in addressing how students, the percentage of students that are actually meeting their goals as well. And so that is going to be sent out to the field in the near future. I see some questions that are coming through in the chat, and so this is actually the perfect timing. And I just want to note that we actually do have a time for a turn and talk, and so I just realized we actually end at 10 after. So Iona, I'm going to answer this, but I'll do it when we come back. So Juliet, can I ask one more time if we can give folks just some time to think about this information that they've heard this morning with one another? And Iona, when you come back, we'll answer and answer the question that you dropped into the chat here. I would love to hear from some of you all about what's coming up for you and what's resonating with you. But before we do that, there were a couple of questions that came through in the chat that I want to make sure that I answer and acknowledge. So one was, what suggestions do you have for student voice to be taken seriously by teachers and at the IEP meeting? And I think that is such a fantastic question. I think some of the work that the team that is currently engaged in bringing student voice to the IEP table is really working on the teacher level first, and coming up with kind of clear steps that they are going to be taking, excuse me, in order to ensure that the pathway is set for students to meaningfully engage at the IEP table, and at those IEP meetings with their teachers and with their families. And so I think that's probably one of the first things that I would suggest is, really having a conversation at the school site and getting different perspectives about what does it mean for us to bring students in, for them to advocate for themselves, for them to include their own voices at the IEP table before then having them come in to do it. You might also think about doing what we call empathy interviews with students to see, like, how would it feel for them to participate, and ask them about that, and ask them about what they may need in order to feel supported to do so. So that would probably be one of the first things I would do if I were starting this in my space. We had another question from Eric that asked, is there any data on the teacher workload time spent on the IEP goal data sheet? And that's a fantastic question, Eric. Thank you for asking. I apologize, I didn't see that earlier. So this, the use of the rubric can be time consuming, we have found, when teachers are first introduced to it. But now we have teachers that are utilizing the rubric on a consistent basis and are more and more familiar with the tool. And so now it's just kind of a checklist that they're aligning their goal writing to, and like scoring themselves just to say, like, okay, do I have all of the elements that I need to have present on my IEP goal to ensure that it's a well-written IEP? As far as the scoring is concerned, oftentimes that scoring is happening on the back end, either with a program specialist, a special education director, someone who's kind of in administration, who is scoring the data and then able to utilize that information to give feedback to the providers, to special education teachers or case managers about their overall goal writing as well. And then that is the data that we use when we're collecting it on a monthly basis. All right, so those were the two questions that I saw in the chat. Are there any other remaining questions out there? Okay.
So if there aren't any questions, I am going to close this out. So thank you again, Jasmine, for an amazing session. And thank you to everyone in attendance for your commitment to our students with disabilities and their families from birth to childhood and beyond. The slides and resources from this presentation can be accessed in the session description section of the VFAIR's agenda page. And if you have any additional questions, please head over to the information booth. Be sure to join us for lunch at 12:40 and our closing remarks and keynotes from 12:40 to 2 o'clock. As a reminder, you can connect with other attendees in the social lounge and stop to take a selfie in the photo booth. And don't forget to share on your socials and tag at SIP Inclusions and tag at SIP Inclusion with the hashtag SIPCon 2024. I also would like to say thank you to our ASL interpreters and also our Spanish interpreters and also VFAIR's rep for being here and supporting this session. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy your lunch.